everyone. Once again, it's Hector Aguilar of Aguilar Realty Group, together with my associate Ben. Ben, your agent. How you doing, Ben?
Good. How are you, Hector?
Good, good, good. I'm excited today because today we're going to talk about appraisals, right?
Yes.
We are now far into your first transaction where we've just ordered the appraisal. We've got a confirmation from the loan officer that the appraisal was ordered on Monday afternoon. So we wanted to talk a little bit about appraisals and kind of set the expectation as to what an appraisal is, when is it ordered, who orders it, what's needed to be ordered. So we've got a lot of topics to cover today. Okay, Ben?
Perfect. Awesome.
All right. So first thing that we're going to talk about today is what is an appraisal? Okay. And an appraisal is a report that gives the opinion of the current market value of a property. It actually confirms that the price that a buyer is offering to a seller actually conforms with the actual contract price. Now, that would be in a normal market, but currently we're not in a normal market. In fact, many buyers are having to waive their appraisal contingencies with their initial offers. And why is that? And the reason why is because there's a lot of buyers and there's not a lot of inventory.
Right.
So in order for you to be able to, as a buyer, to get your offer accepted, you may be required to waive your appraisal contingency. So I just wanted to kind of cover that so you have a better expectation as a buyer as to what an appraisal does for you, pardon me, and how the lender uses it, okay? So an appraisal, once again, is conducted by a licensed appraiser who's taken many courses and is very experienced in doing appraisals on a property. Remember that an appraisal is a snapshot in time. An appraisal only has a shelf life of about 90 days. And why is that? The reason why, Ben, is because the market changes every single day, every week, every month. So something that might be worth, let's say, $550 today may not be worth $550 in 60 or 90 days, depending on how the market is moving. And this market, the market is moving completely up, right? We're seeing that values are going up and appraisals are coming in under agreed price. So we're seeing that values are going up. So that appraisal value will only have a shelf life of maybe 30 to 60 days. Now, what's the appraisal used for? Well, the appraiser is going to go out and do an opinion of value. And when it gets delivered, the actual loan company, whether it's a mortgage bank, your traditional bank, a mortgage broker, is going to use that appraisal to determine how much money they can lend against that property for your buyer. Okay, so typically if you're financing a purchase, you're going to need an appraisal. If you're refinancing a property you already own, you're going to need an appraisal, right? Because the bank is going to determine how much they can lend you based on that current market snapshot report, or otherwise known as an appraisal. Okay?
Got it. Okay.
All right. So in a purchase transaction, who orders the appraiser? Okay, that's one of the common questions we get. Is it the real estate agent? Is it the buyer? Or is it the loan officer? And in truth, the buyer pays for the appraisal to be done, but the buyer does not order the appraisal to be completed. Okay, at some point, your loan officer or your mortgage company is going to order the appraisal, on your behalf. So in our environment since 2008, there was a regulation that passed that restricted agents or loan officers from having direct contact with appraisers. Okay. And the obvious reason was because they wanted to make sure that the appraisal reports were unbiased or uninfluenced from either a loan officer or a real estate agent. So how they're ordered now is, once the loan officer from the mortgage company the buyer is working with, or the homeowner who's refinancing is working with, has determined that you have the minimum requirements to order the appraisal, what they do is they submit it to what's called an appraisal management company, or an AMC. And there's several licensed appraisers that work with AMCs, and there's a few companies out there. So what happens is the loan officer will submit the appraisal order through the AMC, and then an appraiser will be selected to do that appraisal report on behalf of the AMC. So therefore, eliminating any potential contact between the real estate agent, the buyer or seller, or the mortgage company. So that's who orders the appraisals, okay?
Okay.
All right. Now, the next question is, when is that appraisal ordered? And that's a very good question.
Yeah.
Depending on the mortgage company you're working with, it could be right away, it could be within a week, or it can be maybe within a period of 2 weeks or less. Okay. Now, in this environment, most real estate agents that are representing sellers we want those appraisals to be ordered as quickly as possible, right? So it just depends on who you're working with as far as your mortgage company to find out how long it will take for them to order that appraisal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there are some banks that if you work with them, they might order the appraisal as soon as you get the offer accepted. However, there are some documents that need to be provided in order for that to happen. And we'll cover that in just a few minutes, okay?
So for instance, can you tell people, like, for instance, with the transaction we're dealing with now, we're talking about now, it took about a week, like about a week.
Absolutely. And so since we're on the topic as to what's needed in order to order an appraisal, there's a few documents that are needed from your loan officer in order to be able to get that taken care of and ordered right away. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that once the offer is accepted, that the loan officer gets a fully executed purchase agreement of a property that they've already accepted an offer. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that they have a copy of all contracts, seller counteroffers, buyer counteroffers, or any addendums that may have been part of the negotiation. Okay, so the lender's going to need that. The second thing that they're going to need is escrow instructions from the escrow company that is going to be managing the transaction. But the most important part of the escrow instructions is, in order to order the appraisal with the appraisal management companies, you have to have the escrow buyer fees provided to the loan officer as well. So those are the three things that you're going to need immediately in order to order your appraisal. In some cases, some lenders may need a copy of the escrow instructions. They may need a copy of the preliminary report, which is a report that title insurances provide lenders in order to show that they whatever liens or taxes might be against the property currently. Okay, they do need page 10 of our California RPA contract, which is a confirmation of escrow that they received the contract. They also may need a confirmation that the earnest money deposit that was negotiated in your contract has been received by escrow. So there's already some consideration in escrow. And in some cases, they may need some tax rolls. And those are also provided by the escrow company. So again, some lenders are able to order that right away, but typically it's going to take you anywhere between 5 to 7 business days to be able to get these documents in order to have the appraisal ordered by your loan officer. So for example, for the transaction that you're in, it took us about a week to get those documents together in order to order that appraisal. Okay.
Got it.
So once that's ordered, what happens next? Right? As I mentioned to you before, the appraiser actually gets the order from the appraisal management company. And when they pick the order, they have to get in touch with the listing agent or the seller's representative in order to confirm an appointment. So typically an appraiser wants to get out to the property within 24 to 48 hours in order to do his initial visual inspection of the property in order to complete his appraisal report. And typically what happens is you're going to find that they take around maybe 10, 15 or 20 minutes at the property in order to complete the report. They do a lot of work up front. And so an appraisal typically consists of about 3 or 4 properties that are similar to the property that your buyer is negotiating on, with the exact same number of bedrooms and bathrooms, kitchen, rooms, and sometimes even the lot size is important as well. So they try and get those that are the closest to the property that are within half a mile or less. And in some cases, if they're unable to see other properties that have recently closed in order to support their value, they might be able to extend to about a mile out. Now, it's really important to understand that appraisers need to stay within the city of that property first and foremost. If they can't find any usable comparables, then they might be able to extend to the next city, but they have to provide additional information so that when the bank receives it, they understand why they went outside that half a mile or mile perimeter. Okay.
Got it.
Now,
okay.
To be honest with you, what is needed in an appraisal, right? So they're going to have the 3 or 4 comparables to determine what the value is. And keep in mind that appraisers are only able to use closed transactions, recent closed transactions, in determining the current market value of that property. Now, in this fast-moving market, sometimes we see people that or agents that might say, hey, I got additional comparables. They're on the market that can maybe support a higher value. But we come to find out that they're not properties that are currently closed. They're properties that are currently negotiated under contract or pending, like what we know as pending in the market. But the truth is that we can't, the appraisers, pardon me, can't use those because they're only allowed to use sold comparables. Now, in a market that's moving really quickly, or maybe in an area where there's not a lot of comparables, they may be able to make the exception, but it's going to be determined by the underwriter of that bank whether that comparable is acceptable or not. Okay. One of the other things that we got to discuss about appraisals too is the condition of the property, right? Why is that important? Because the banks are the ones that are taking the highest interest in this particular property. You know, typically buyers might come in with 3.5%, which means that the bank has a 96.5% interest in the property. They might come in with 10%, which is 90%, or 20%, which means 80% of the bank owns that property or has an interest in that property. So it just depends. So condition is going to be extremely important. So the appraiser is going to look for that as well. Once the report is completed, typically the appraisal will take about 2 or 3 business days to return that to the AMC, and ultimately a copy of the appraisal will be delivered to the borrower, whether it's a buyer or if they're refinancing the borrower. Okay. And sometimes the appraisers, although they're not a physical inspector, they do have some minimum requirements when it comes to condition of the property. So they check to make sure that the smoke detectors are in place, that the carbon monoxide detectors are in place and working, and also that the water heater is strapped appropriately. If the loan that the buyer is using is an FHA loan, then there's also some additional health and safety requirements that FHA requires that we can go into detail at a later point, or cover with you as a buyer. If you have a question, we can do that one-on-one. But there are some additional health and safety issues that appraisal has to satisfy. So condition is very important. Again, the reason why is because the bank has the highest vested interest in that property, because they're going to loan typically between 80 to 96.5% of that purchase price. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So that pretty much wraps up what an appraisal is, who orders the appraisal, when is the appraisal ordered, and what's required to order the appraisal, and what the conditions of the property mean for the appraisal itself. The ultimate goal for an appraisal is to determine the current market value of the property and to ensure that the agreed price between the buyer and seller actually matches what they've accepted. In most cases, that's sufficient. In this particular market, because it's not uncommon that buyers are making offers above appraisal value, it is a little different right now. All it means is that the bank is going to lend you pretty much the percentage of the loan. They're going to lend you pretty much the percentage of the loan for you to of that appraised value. So, for example, if you made an offer on a property that's $550, you're probably not going to get, and the appraisal comes back at $525, then chances are, as a buyer, you're going to need to make up that gap, because the bank is only going to finance based on $525,000, whether it's, you're doing 3.5% down or 5% or 10% down. They're only going to finance based on that appraisal amount. Does that make sense, Ben?
So you're just saying, that was the question I was going to ask. You answered it. So basically, if a buyer comes in with an offer of $550, but the appraisal guy says, no, this is $525, they had to cover 25%. What if it's over?
Well, if it's over, then, the buyer pretty much agreed on that price and the seller agreed on that price, and they close at that price. So if, for example, if they offered $550 and the appraisal comes in at $560, well, then there's a benefit to the buyer because he's got a little bit of equity now built into his purchase.
Perfect.
But if it's the reverse and they've removed their appraisal contingency, the likelihood is that the buyer is going to make up that gap.
Perfect. You answered. Okay. That's the question. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, the other thing could happen too is that, let's say the buyer doesn't remove their appraisal contingency and there is a difference. There's one of 3 things that could happen. Number one is the buyer can go back to the seller and say, hey, my appraisal came in short. I'd like to pay appraisal value. The seller could say, no, we negotiated a higher price. I want the higher price. And if they agree, they can close. If they don't agree, the second thing is they would cancel, right? If their appraisal contingency is in place. But likely what happens, and it's the third option, usually what they do is they'll negotiate and meet halfway. What does that mean? They'll split the difference. In other words, if there's a $25,000 difference, they'll split it down the middle. They'll reduce the price $12,500, and the buyer will pay an additional $12,500, and they'll meet at a happy medium. So there's a couple of things that could happen there as far as the appraisal value not meeting the agreed amount price. Does that make sense?
Yep, I'm writing it all down.
Wonderful. Well, that wraps up our, if you have any more questions, Ben, that wraps up our video here on appraisals and what they are.
No, tune in for the next week. Yeah.
Yes, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today as we discussed appraisals. If you have any questions about an appraisal or you're in the market to refinance or purchase or sell your property, please reach out to Hector Aguilar of Aguilar Realty Group, and Ben and I will be more than happy to help you with your transaction. Take care, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Thanks, Hector. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Ben.